So I know I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. I'm not going to assume that everybody was in here previously. My name is Monica Gutierrez. I've been working with the Rape Crisis Center, local Rape Crisis Center in Fort Worth, Texas, for the past 16 years of my life as a bilingual case manager in various capacities, but currently as a bilingual case manager. Also, I currently work with our high school group in Arlington Seventh-day Adventist Church in Arlington, Texas. And so my field is pretty much in the world of sexual trauma, sexual violence. And I know what you have in your presentation has a different title, and it was meant for something different. But one of the things that I kept praying when Amara asked me about giving a second presentation, I was like, okay, I can do a presentation on trauma, on violence, on so many different things. But as I kept praying and asking, Lord, what is it you want from me? Tell me what you need from me. I didn't like his response. Anybody ever had that situation where it's like, you ask God something to show you, and then he tells you, and he's like, and then you're like, maybe I shouldn't have asked you that. Maybe that's just me. But I feel he was very intentional of saying, Monica, I need you to share your story. I need you to talk about your story. And for those of you who don't know me, I have no problem helping victims of sexual violence and sexual abuse, and I can do that all day long. I've only shared my own personal testimony. I can actually count it in my hand, not completely fill my hand yet. So one, I've done a lot of work, so it doesn't make me nervous. It makes me nervous, as you all know, some survivors of abuse just kind of feel exposed. And so, but I feel that God was leading me to kind of share my story with you. And I want to do this differently. This isn't going to be kind of your typical seminar. I want to kind of share my own victimization of abuse and how God took me from victim to survivor, to restoration. And as he continues to do that in my life, but I'm calling this my own redeeming love story. And I have a couple of things that I want to share with you. But to start off with, I just want to start, and if we can start in prayer. So dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I ask that you be with this group. I ask that you be with this meeting, Lord. And I ask that you make it a safe place where you reign and you get comfort and love, and we get to see a different side of you we have yet to see, Lord. I thank you for your love. I thank you for your mercy, and all the things that you have done in my life, Lord, and that I know you have plans for everyone in this Zoom. So Lord, take our lives. We surrender them to you, Lord, and make them instruments of your love. Be with me, be with my words, be with everyone here, Lord. Be with their hearts and their minds, and when they see you, may we create an opportunity for them to have a different encounter with you that they've never had before. I ask this in Jesus' name I pray, amen. As I said, sorry guys, I had a presentation and I'm trying to bring that up, but I can't. But because we're gonna do this a little different, I know I see your beautiful pictures, but I wanna ask or encourage you to turn on your videos. I'd like to be able to see you, if possible, only because I feel like if I'm going to feel very vulnerable in a position to kind of share my story, it'd be nice to see who I'm sharing it with, right? So thank you so much. I definitely appreciate it. Like I said, my name is Monica Gutierrez, and yes, I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I can remember, and I want to kind of set up, I was raised at Seventh-day Adventist, right? Grew up in the Adventist church, grew up with Adventist parents. And I also, what's it called? I think the earliest memory that I have of my abuse that I could remember from the very first time was probably when I was 8 years old, right? And that didn't come until later. So I wanna share with you, growing up, I definitely grew up in a home with both mom and dad, right? Both going to church and visiting people, and church became our family because my family, one, we were the only Adventist family in our immediate family, right? So we were kind of the only Adventist family for both my mom's side and my dad's side. Also, we were the only ones who lived about a distance away from from the rest of the family, right? So we didn't live in the same town as almost the rest of the family. The rest of the family lives in Bordertown, Texas. We lived up north in Fort Worth, kind of the Dallas area, kind of thing, if you're familiar with Texas a little bit. And so, but we always went back to visit grandparents in summers, right? During the summers and visit family and hung out with them for a while. And so for me, the importance of talking to children about abuse come from so much of that stem there. And I was never given the conversation of like what sex is, what abuse is. I don't know if you guys were you guys ever taught what sex or sexual abuse was? Like, let me tell you, my sex conversation, I laugh at my father all the time because I remember being a teenager and I remember coming to my parents and be like, what is sex? And I remember my father was like, mija, that's cochino, and you wait till you're married and that's it. And I remember thinking like, that explains nothing, right? Like, that's just what that is. As an adult, when I started working in the Rape Crisis Center, I remember talking to my parents and I'm like, why didn't you guys ever talk to us about these things? Why didn't you guys ever teach us these things? And my poor dad, like, I love him to death, but he's just like, mija, nobody taught us, right? And I think as parents, we teach what we know, right? We do the best to teach what we know. And what we don't, we kind of just don't touch. And I think our church is doing a better job of having this conversation, because when I was growing up, this was never something we talked about, like never something we talked about. But now I think even within the past couple years, like the church has really embraced it. We have things like Love in the Making. We even have a whole campaign of End It Now, right? And those have been things where have been really great, where the church and communities kind of come together. But that wasn't around growing up. So I had no idea. We also didn't even have conversations of like private parts or any of those things. Like, I grew up in a household with like probably all of you guys where we don't even say private part names, right? We never said vagina or penis or any of that. It was all these other names, right? It was like, you just don't let nobody touch you there. Like, you make sure your flower is covered, and I'm just like, flower, okay. So all of these things. And so never being educated, I never had the language to discuss what was happening to me. So when we would go visit out of town and talk to family members, things that were happening there that I was seeing was very just different from my home, right? And I understood I didn't like it, but I had no language or verbiage to discuss what it was. So it made me a very angry child. It made me a very angry child because I hated what was happening. It felt disgusting. I didn't like it. And I knew that there was something wrong, but I didn't know how to say that. Right. And I also was very angry at, like, I felt very singled out, in protection. I have a younger sister. And because when I went to this person's houses, when I would happen, I would never let my niece, my little sister, who's 4 years younger than me, hang out with me or play at this cousin's house. Right. And so it created a lot of separation in that sense. But coming back home to Fort Worth, that was never something that happened. So it was two different worlds in my brain. Luckily, when we lived growing up in the church, one of the things that I remember a lot is knowing and growing how Jesus always felt what we felt. That was a message I understood and I knew very, very early on. Jesus always felt something that I felt, so that I took comfort in that, and in my healing process, that's something that helped. But another thing that I also grew up with very young is we make Jesus sad when you get mad at him, right? I don't know about you guys, but I was born, you don't question adults, right? So you also don't question Jesus. Things happen for a reason, and they happen because that's what God allowed to happen. And we just need to praise him through that. That was such a foreign concept to me, especially with someone who challenges everything. I don't know about you guys, but I question everything, right? And I'm reading through these stories and reading through these things, and it's like, if Jesus is so big to create the world and create this thing, how's he gonna be mad at me for asking questions? Right? How's he gonna be sad? Like, how can he create this entire world and do all these big things, but he's gonna be sad because I'm mad? Right? So that became a whole different look and how I saw Jesus and how I saw virulent. But I think that was more like, we don't argue with your parents. And if Jesus is a higher level of your parents, you just don't do that. Right? That's definitely how I grew up. And so it was really hard to talk or question some of these things that were happening. As I was growing up in the church, we were very much involved in like Pathfinders, very much involved in so many like youth activities and stuff. But when I became a teenager, something that came very present was the writings of Ellen G. White were really good. But when I grew up with the writings of Ellen G. White, they were taught, or they were used as punishment, or they were used as like, see, Ellen G. White says you can't do this, or Ellen G. White says you can't do that, or Sister White says this, or Sister White says that. I'm telling you, when I was a teenager, I couldn't stand Sister White. I was like, who is this heifer, and why is she over here all up in our faces? Because somebody like, it went as far as somebody saying, Ellen G. White says that going to Six Flags is a sin. And I was like, did Six Flags even exist when she was around? Like, is that even real? Like, what is happening? Like, I'm sure she was riding around in like buggies and stuff. Like, was that a thing? Because that felt like a ride, and people would get like upset when I would question these things. And so I made up my mind that by the time like I was probably 11 to 12, Sister White and we just did not get along. We could not vibe together. Didn't pick up her books. Was anybody who mentioned Sister White, I was like, we about to fight, right? And I think at a very young age, I also grew up in a household, although it was loving, there was also a lot of verbal abuse, like a lot of minimizing, a lot of name calling, that kind of thing. And because I didn't have a voice at home, when I was at school, I found getting into arguments with people definitely released a lot of that anger and that anxiety that I had inside. So at a very young age, y'all don't judge me, I really enjoyed fighting. Like, I enjoyed getting into arguments. And the very first time that someone pushed me and I realized, no, you didn't, we about to fight right now. And we pushed each other back and we started physically fighting. The power that came from that was definitely addicting, because I felt that I was in a world very powerless, right? And so fighting was my way of coping, of where I can put all these emotions. And so I became very much the defender of other people. Like, anytime somebody was done wrong, like, oh, we fighting, right? Anytime somebody would say something to me, we're fighting, like any of those things. And it got to be very norm at home. At school, I was very lucky in several locations because my parents weren't always cold, right? It is, yeah. And I think when not giving those opportunities to feel heard, they definitely were a way of escape and an outlet for me. Um, I had one incident though that was very scary. At one point, I got into a fight with a young lady that I remember being so angry, and after hitting, we ended up on the floor. I remember I just grabbed her head and hit it on the concrete floor, and her eyes rolled back and passed out. And I think that's when I knew I had a problem. And I praise God that she made it. But to me, that was a complete wake up call of something is wrong, right? And I needed help, and I fully acknowledged that at that time. At that same time, y'all, this is how I know God is love, because if there's something that I know out of my own personal story, is God is constantly pursuing us where we are at, and at that moment, I didn't know it. But the small Adventist academy had opened up in Fort Worth for the very first time at that time. And my parents were like, I think you're getting into trouble at this point. My brother had already joined the gang. We grew up in not always the safest neighborhood kind of thing, but he's like, before we get you involved in that, like, let's put you in this Adventist school kind of thing. But y'all, when I say school, like, it was a church, right? Like, and I don't know if I mean, we all know Adventist church, like, schools, but it was a small population. I went from a school of over 300 to 400 students in 7th and 8th grade to a classroom of 13 students of both 7th and 8th grade. And I'm sitting here of like, what is going on? And y'all, I'm in a church, so there's no way I could ever get away with fighting somebody and people not knowing, right? So I'm like, how is this gonna happen? Like, this is not cool. Like, this is not okay. My friends are over there. This is also the very first time in my life, because I went to a predominantly Latino and African American school. So this is also for the very first time where I am experiencing that I am literally the minority, right? Everyone else don't look like me. and for those of you who know what I'm talking about, that's a scary thought. Right? And in my teenage brain, I am in fear. I am in a different place, and I'm just like, this ain't gonna work. Like, this is just not like, Jesus, hold my mouth, because if you don't hold my fist, it's gonna be a whole different problem. And so my dad made a deal with me. He said, Mija, I just need you to try it for 3 months, right? If in 3 months you don't like it, we'll move you back. I'm like, okay, cool. I just have to handle this for 3 months. I'm in there by the 3rd month. I'm like, Daddy, let's go. Daddy, let's go. We ready to go. He's like, baby, just hold on just a little longer, to how to pull you back and do all this. Y'all, 3 months turned into 3 years. Okay. This is when I say Jesus has jokes. I will tell you, my life is all about Jesus has jokes. And this is how I know Jesus has a sense of humor. I needed to be at this school. And when I say I needed to be here, I was very much an angry. Now, I was so mean. Like, and so when I realized I wasn't going back, I'm like, okay, then I got to get kicked out. Right. And we all know what that's like. What are we going to do? When I say Jesus loves me, because in the house of the Lord, I started a fire. Like, I flooded the restrooms. I punched a wall. I cheated on a test and admitted it. And the school was like, no, we think you need to be here. I'm like, you crazier than I am. What is wrong with you? And I look back, and the principal at that time, I had a conversation not long ago with her. And one of the things she said to me, and mind you, they kicked out other people who were accomplices with me, but I always took the blame. I was like, I did it. I started it. I did this. I did that. It must have pulled fire alarms, which caused them to like have to pay fines to the city, because when there's no fire, like, you're taking those things away. The flooding, I don't even know how much money that like took to have to fix that. But she literally said to me, every time your name came across the board, Monica, everybody wanted to kick you out. But in my spirit, I knew you needed to stay here. And I fought for you. And that was so profound to me, because I finally understood I needed a moment of stillness. And that verse comes to mind where it's like, just be still and I will fight for you. And I understand how God was fighting for me, even when I was fighting him, literally fighting him. I must have not been fighting physical fighting, but I was literally fighting Jesus to get out of the school, right? and they didn't kick me out. I stayed there my first year. I felt like it was, and I learned for the first time, I heard a pastor say, Jesus got angry. Angry is a feeling. It's not a condemnation, right? And Jesus can handle your anger. Like, this is where you get to tell him anything and everything. Like, he can handle it. And I was like, what? Like, and it's so funny. I know there are silly things, but I think in my faith, the more I started praying, I think this is when also he became a friend. Like, I knew Jesus was God and Lord, because that's how I grew up with, right? He was this supernatural being that needs to be respected. But I didn't know him as my friend. I didn't know as someone I can converse with him. And when it was explained to me, that made so much sense because I can argue with a friend, right? I can reconcile with a friend. I can talk to a friend on how they hurt me and how they did all these things. And so talking to Jesus about that, when somebody first displayed into that, it's like, oh, that makes so much sense. And talking to him as my friend, I was able to say, like, dude, I can't stand this. Like, I'm angry and I don't even like it. I don't even, and then there were small ways where I started to pray and started to see God answering, right? And there were also, I don't know if you guys, but I was taught that there are certain things you say to Jesus and there are certain things you don't, right? Like, Jesus don't care about the secular stuff. He cares about other things. And that to me was a little mind boggling because I was also a really diehard football fan at that time. I'm still am. Pray for me, okay? Especially during football season. But because I am a Dallas, and yes, I am a Cowboys fan, and yes, we need Jesus. I acknowledge all of that, okay? So don't come for me because I acknowledge it. But I think one of the things that I remember saying, like, we would watch football games and stuff, and I was like, oh, come on. And I was like, and I would pray, like, come on, George, just let him get in the end zone, right? Let him like do this. And I remember someone saying to me, like, God doesn't care about those things. Like, if you're gonna pray to Jesus, you need to pray about things that care. Like, he doesn't care about those things. And so I was like, well, then God doesn't care about everything in my life then, because that's what's important to me in my little teenage brain. And I finally heard someone tell me, no, God does care about those things. God cares about everything you care about. He's like, so try it, Monica. Try praying for the Cowboys and try praying. Y'all, that's probably why they haven't won in a long time, because when I was praying for them that time, they won the Super Bowl. But it's been years where I'm like, Jesus, I need you on other things. Right? But I think in those small years and in those times, like, God was like, he was letting me know he was listening. He was letting me know he was fighting for me. He was letting me know that he wanted to be a part of my life. And that was very different to me. After finishing that junior academy, I went to a boarding school, and that was the very first time at a boarding school I was away from my family, but I was able to determine my own relationship with Jesus. And this one, for the very first time, I was introduced to the book Desire of Ages, right? And y'all know who the author of it for this person is, and y'all know how I feel about her. So when someone said, Monica, if you really want to know about Jesus, I was like, read this book. Y'all, I saw that book and had the fifth step, and I said, don't try me, right? Because I haven't gotten in a fight in a long time, but don't try me. Like, we will fight. And she said, no, like, read this. And when I tell you, I read that book for myself, and I was like, to this day, that is my favorite book. And I was so angry at how it was used against us. I was like, if you only understood. And the best way that I describe it to my friends at that time, I was like, how many of you guys ever seen movies, right? Where you see movies and then you got to see, like, behind the scenes how it was made? I was like, that's her book. That is her book. That is the book in the desire. Whatever is not in the Bible, like, I feel like it's a curtain to be like, look at what happened in the background. Look at what happened with angels and with the supernatural things, and how he was fighting for you. And just like this teacher was fighting for me without my knowledge, like, I feel like this is what the Desire of Ages and Sister White's books are. We get to see how Jesus is fighting for those with them actually not knowing. And I begin to, like, just search the word, and I'm like, okay, Lord, let's do this. Show me what you want for your life, or show me what I need to change in my life. And be careful with that question, because it's a double-edged sword for real. I was also a junior in high school when I heard for the very first time someone give their own testimony about being a victim of sexual abuse. And when I tell you, up until this moment, I love how God is the designer of our bodies and of our minds, because from the moment of when my abuse stopped happening up into my teenage years, my brain went into survival mode and completely forgot or blocked those memories. right? It wasn't until I heard somebody else speak about their own abuse that I actually flood. When I mean flood, I mean the open gates of flood of images of things that had happened to me by a family member came into mind, and in my little bitty brain of like, whoa, um, it felt like ever gone to the beach, ever like ride the waves, right? But then you come up and there's one that's too big and kind of takes you it takes you under. That's how I felt. I felt like, what? And it all made sense in how angry I was. It all made sense how when I go to this, person's house or to this place, I don't feel safe on the inside. It all made sense. But in my head, again, this was a cousin of mine, right? And I remember having images of him actually sexually assaulting me. In my teenage brain, because I still didn't have a language, in my brain, another thing that we were also grown up with or taught was, sexual purity, right? Sex stays into your marriage. Remember, that was my conversation with my dad, like, and we're taught, and I was very okay with being pure until I was married. But then my brain tells me, but wait, this, you've been you've had sex with someone. You're not pure. And it's also incestual. It's also so it's as bad as it can get for you. Like, you're not pure. You had sex with your cousin. Like, ew, that's just gross. And when I tell you, I couldn't take enough showers to feel clean. I remember scrubbing so hard that my skin was beginning to be raw. And I just felt an emotion of just dirtiness and just shamefulness. And I remember I was dating somebody at that time, and it was probably one of the nicest boys I'd ever met in my entire life, right? And we were both talking about waiting for marriage and that kind of thing. And he was like, yes. And I remember thinking, like, this isn't fair to him. This relationship is not fair to him because I'm not pure. But how do I tell him that? Because who wants to hear that their girlfriend had sex with their cousin? Right? Like, there's no way I can tell him that. Like, I can't even believe it in my head yet. So unfortunately, I definitely hurt this young man breaking up, but I let him know, like, I don't think this is right. I feel like I need to focus on Jesus. You ever use that excuse? Like, let's focus on Jesus. Not here. We're only teenagers. We're not getting married anytime soon. And I will admit that it was really, I didn't handle it the best way in my own little teenage brain. But I also felt very much guilty, very much shameful, very much like I don't deserve someone who's pure because I'm not pure. It also set the precedence for my continuous relationships because moving forward, I also didn't feel it was fair for me to date anybody who was a virgin. Because again, I was also taught you can't ask for what you can't bring to the table. Right. And so that's not something I can bring to the table. So how am I going to ask for that? And so unfortunately, again, looking at unhealthy relationships growing up and being surrounded for that, I literally believe that that's what I deserved. That's as good as it gets for me. And having these conversations with Jesus, and again, I don't ever find it. It's not by chance that is also when I fell in love with Desire of Ages, because I understood he loved me, right? But however, I couldn't completely understand that I could be loved, if that makes any sense. Like, there's a difference in that. And so from that moment on, I definitely knew that I still didn't classify it as abuse, still was an assault in my brain, but definitely knew that there was something wrong, kind of thing. We fast forward to my young adulthood, and there's clear that there's something wrong, right? I am, I think, a whole maybe 20 years old, about to be 21. And out of the blue, my cousin, who is also my abuser, decides to contact me. And that in my brain was so strange. And the conversation went a lot like this. And I answer it because I didn't know who it was, but I answer it. And they say, "Hey, Monica, this is your cousin Miko. Like, I'm in town. I haven't seen you in a while. Like, do you want to hang out?" Praise God that at this point I'd also started counseling. So let me backtrack a little bit. By the time I was like 19 and I graduated, I realized that there was something that was not right in my head, right? And so I needed counseling. I needed to go into counseling. However, the messages from the church at that moment were, we don't seek counseling. One, you're not crazy, right? Because one, Latinos don't do that. We just not crazy. We don't go to other people and talk about, you know, counseling. It literally, I heard people in my family and in my culture say that's white people stuff, right? And I also, the messages from the church was like, when you have a problem and you're struggling with something, you need to pray, because you just need to pray that away. Like, and if it hasn't gone away and you haven't stopped hurting, your faith isn't strong enough and you're not believing, right? So these were the messages that I was receiving as a young person in the church. And also as a Latina, it's like, you're crazy. You're crazy. You just don't do these things. You're crazy, right? So when I finally admitted I needed counseling, it literally took the first month of my counseling sessions. Like, I remember the very first time that I went in, I sat there and I just cried. And I just cried because I literally sat there and my therapist was like, "What's going on?" And I was just like, "I'm not supposed to be here. Like, my faith is supposed to be stronger than this." And I remember she cried along with me and she said, "Says who?" Right? And she had to be a God-fearing woman because she said, Jesus had others pray for him. Jesus asked for help when he was on the cross. Like, Jesus asked his friends, "I need you to come pray with me because I can't handle this." Like, it had to be God who led her this, you know? And she threw me. And so we spent that entire first session going through Bible stories. Where asking for help doesn't mean there's not enough faith. And I think my favorite was, it's kind of the prophet who like kills all the prophets of Baal, right? And he's got like a huge win. And then like 2 days later, he's like, "Lord, I want to die." Right? And I was like, "Oh, my bad." And I also read a quote of where even Ellen G. White struggled with her own salvation at one point. And I'm like, this is Sister White. This is like the champion of champions. Like, okay, this is normal, right? And so that was great. The second time I went in, I literally sat there and I was like, we don't do this. I'm a Latina. I asked for help from my pastor, from my family. We don't talk about this with white people. We just don't. Like, that is not something we do. And I remember having to go through this and having to have these conversations. And I remember just the first month I had to cry through and grieve the fact that I was asking for help, you know. And I remember, so a couple weeks, I've been in counseling for a couple months, you know. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy. This is normal. This is normal for what I went through. Right? Like, this is really normal. This is, and I learned how after abuse, your brains are rewired, literally rewired, you know. And so I learned about trauma and what it does to the brain and what it does to the body. And she went through explaining, like, you are not crazy. This is normal for trauma. And I remember she literally came to me and she said, "Monica, if your brain is an organ just like your heart is, wouldn't you go to the heart specialist if your heart hurts?" Well, yeah, right? Like, wouldn't you go, like, if you break an arm, right? You're going to go get that taken care of. So if your brain is hurting and broken, why would you not see a therapist? And she's like, especially if it's the motherboard of how your entire body works. And I'm like, Jesus got jokes, right? Because I don't know why anybody never told me it was that simple. Right? Like, yeah, that makes sense. So moving fast forward to a couple of months when my cousin calls me and he is just like, hey Monica, it's Nico. Like, where are you at? Like, I want to hang out with you. Like, this is y'all. When I say all I remember saying is, I remember what you did to me. Like, I don't want to hang out with you. We is not friends. I remember what you did to me. And I remember saying, I remember you did A, B, like you pulled on. Like I remember going off on details and like things that I probably never even said in therapy. And I was like, I don't want to see you. I want nothing to do with you. I have no, like, get out of here. He hangs up. Y'all, when I tell y'all, I felt like $1,000,000. Y'all ever seen that movie Rocky, where he's on top of the, he's just like, ta-da-da. Like, that's exactly how I felt. Like, I went off on him. I told him, like, I got my power back. Like, I know it. I felt like on top of, like, the fight of my life, what I was fighting for all this time. Like, I just put it where it needed to go. And I set boundaries and I said this. When I tell you my victory was short lived, 15 minutes later, my mom calls me and she's like, Monica, what's going on? And I was like, what do you mean, mama? Like, what's happening? And she's like, your cousin called me, right? Whoops, wait, sorry, it just went dark. I know. We're changing batteries. We good? Everybody good? Okay. And so she's like, your cousin just called me. And I was like, and I'm thinking like somebody else. And she's like, no, your cousin Miko called me. And I was like, oh. I said, what did he say? And she said, he said that you are saying that he touched you, that he did this to you, and he does, the Monica, that you're lying, that he does not remember you doing any of this, that you're making up stories, that you're doing all. And when I tell you my world came tumbling down in like less than 15 minutes of feeling all kinds of victorious, like, I was like, what? And I hear my mother crying. Because although this is not new information for me, this is new information for her, right? And I said, Mommy, do you believe him? And she's like, I don't know, mija. He was crying. He was telling me he swears on your grandfather's grave, and you know how him and him were close. Here's what we're talking about, that manipulation, right? She's like, and she's like, and he's just like this. And I hear my mother very distraught. And I said, you know what, Mommy, I'm on my way to your home, because I didn't live with my parents at that time. I was like, I'm on my way. Like, just hang on for a little bit. I'll be right there in a little bit. She's like, okay. And so I get to my house and my uncle David is there. And he's pacing back and forth and he's got a rifle by the door. And I'm like, what is happening? I walk in, my dad is pacing, my mom's on the phone with my cousin, my oldest cousin, Nico's older sister. And I hear her yelling and screaming at my mom. And I hear her cussing her out. And I take the phone and I'm like, what the hell's wrong with you? She's like, why are you making up stories? My brother never did anything to you. You need to stop telling people that. I'm going to sue you. Like, we're going to do this and that. And just started calling me every name in the book. And I was like, what is happening? My mom started getting calls from like all her aunts and uncles. Well, my cousin, after hanging up with me, apparently called all my aunts and uncles and my parents to let him know that what I am telling everybody is a lie. Y'all, until this day, I never told a soul but my therapist. In my mind, this was going to die with me. Who wants to say that, right? Who wants to expose this kind of conversation? And so now I have no power over everybody knowing my business, right? I have no kind of control of what's happening and I'm being blamed for it, but you want to go around tell everybody that I'm lying? Like, I wish in my younger years I had more grace for my parents and my family, understanding that this is the first time they're hearing about it, right? But now that it was out, all I needed was somebody to say, I believe you. Because he is making me out the liar. This is just like Satan, right? He's going to entangle you in some mess and then he's going to blame you. And I remember my mom was crying, and I'm like, Mom, like, are you okay? She's like, what happened? Why didn't you ever tell us? And I had nothing to say. Like, how do I tell her? This is my mom. How do I tell her? You never taught me how to say anything. Like, a part of me wanted to say, you should have known, right? um, but that wasn't on her. I had learned in therapy that the person responsible for the abuse was only my abuser, nobody else. Right. And so at this point, she was just telling me, she's like, Mija, you should have heard him. Like, he was crying. He was telling me that he would never do something like that. Like, how could we believe something like that? And so I remember asking her, Mom, do you believe him? And she was like, Mija, I don't know. Like, I don't know. And it's because you should have heard him. And so I asked her again, I said, Mom, do you believe him? And she's kidding, Mija, it's because he swore over your grandfather's grave, Mija. And so I'm like, Mom, do you believe him? She's like, I just don't know. And when she said that, my heart broke in 1,000 pieces. And again, I wish I had more grace for my mother at that time, right? Because one, it wasn't her fault. Two, this is all new information to her, right? And in her brain, I there have been no signs. I've been fine, right? I was fine. I was thriving. I was living on my own. I was going to school. I was getting a profession. I also realized I didn't cope with like being a control freak of making sure I was the child you didn't have to complain about, because remember I was a thug growing up. So I wanted to make sure that they had no complaints at this point, and I wanted to be successful in that success story. And I was like, this is not going to defeat me, and went into like overachiever mode, right? But I never showed them where I was vulnerable or where I was hurt, because that's not how you survive in the world. Um, but it also made my mom question what was happening. And that was literally a day before my 21st birthday. And I remember getting in my car and just driving and just crying, because I didn't believe my mother believed me. I didn't know whether she thought I was lying or not, or what was happening. And I definitely know now, and I know she's like believes me, and we've worked through some of those things. Uh, but I also remember thinking, I was never going to tell anybody. This is exactly why I never wanted to say anything. Um, but luckily, like, we've been able to repair that relationship with my parents. And with my teenagers, I wish somebody would told me even harder as a teenager to pray for my parents more, right? Because I also realize this, as they are raising me, they are also growing up. Like, there's no book on how to raise a child. There's no book on how to raise the child who's abused, right? And so we forget that as we are experiencing things, our parents are also experiencing them as the first time. And I wish somebody would have told me that I need to pray for my parents as hard as I could have as a teenager adult. But again, God in his infinite wisdom and just where he is at was like ready to receive me in that sense. And I remember at that moment, what I needed most was to just have somebody say they believe me, right? And it took an aunt and also my therapist, and working through those things. Um, but also working through, I remember this is also when I began to question, why me? Like, why me? Why nobody else? Right? And this is also where I love that I was able to question God. And this is what I find important. When we are reading the word, when we are studying his word, God is so intentional. Like, he is so intentional about what I need from this story is very different from what you're going to need, right? But he's pursuing me and my need. And I remember at that moment, the story that he totally enlightened my life was the man who was born blind, right? And he is healed. And but before he's healed, the disciples are like, Lord, why is he blind? Like, is it something their parents did? Right? Because I also grew up with the idea of like, you do good things happen to you, but you do bad things happen to you. So when this is happening, it's like, what did I do wrong to deserve this? And I remember when God's like, neither he nor his parents sinned, but for the glory of God to be displayed. And I'm like, my parents didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. How is your glory going to be displayed in this mess? Right? Like, how does that even happen? And and I remember thinking I had a very skewed idea of what love was, right? And because I didn't feel I was worthy of love, love was something so unattainable. And I think when God formed me and when he says, so the glory of God can be shown, for me is I have every reason to be angry in the world. I have every reason to hate. Um, and I enjoy, like, guys, seriously, like, not liking people comes very natural to me, right? Hating, fighting, all of that comes really natural to me. But in my life, God has still given me a reason to believe and love and to love. I can take every experience in my life and really should be like this bitter, pissed off woman, right? Hate the world. But I think that's not who I want to be. And that's not who he has called me to be. So if nothing else happens in my life, I want my life to be the kind of thing that's like she has every reason to be angry and to hate God, but she loves. And I don't love because of me. I love because of who he has taught me, how he has pursued me, how he has loved me, right? And one of the best ways that he has shown that through me was in John 8. And this is, guys, you have to, if you have access to your Bibles, pull it out for me, because in this story, in this story is where I find that God helped restore me, right? And I'm sure this is a story you already know, but I want to teach it to you the way he taught it to me, the way he fought for me in it. And I know we don't have a lot of time left, so I wanna be mindful of that. But for me, one of the things that I love, especially, we're gonna go to John 8, uh, 4, right? And it says, and they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Yeah, we just need to pause right there, right? Because one, we already know what happened. We already know she was set up, right? She was set up to fail. Like, this woman was set up to fail. And when I think of my life, I'm like, ooh, Satan really tried to set me up to fail from the beginning, right? Like, I am a lost cause. Statistics tell me, like, that when I am at work, I should be on the other side of the chair, not where I'm at, right? And I was already set up to fail. And what I also like love about this story is when we are talking about people caught in adultery, the law states that both individuals, right? The both individuals should have been stoned. But how many individuals are being brought to Jesus here? One. We got one person, right? Where's the other person? Like, he was part of the entrapment, right? And I realized that in my life, oh my gosh, when Jesus showed me my life through the story, he's like, Monica, I need you. I'm here for you. You're the only one coming to me, right? You're the only one who's being brought to me. Don't worry about him. And I used to be so worried about, like, why isn't his life such as mad as mine, right? like why ain't God getting him yet? Because when I say be still, I need you to be fighting, right? But he seemed fine with going on with his life, not the way I did it. And I remember, when this woman is brought to the temple, I have this image of, like, she is probably caught in adultery. Guys, come on, she was half naked, right? Very much exposed, being brought to the center stage in the church to be judged. And I remember thinking, that is so modern day. If there is anywhere I felt judged, it was definitely the church. It was definitely the church, with how I was dressed, with what I was wearing, what I was not wearing, what I was doing. Everything was a sin. Like Sister White and I were literally, if we were in her times, I'd have been fighting her, physically fighting her in our age. Right? And if there was somewhere I already felt judged, it was the church. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, this is so, and so I was also feeling this way towards my family, because after this came out, we were ostracized, right? It was like, we can't get together because of what Monica said, not because of what was done to her, but because of what she is saying. And I felt this here, because she is being, this is the woman caught in adultery. She's the one who was caught. We got to punish her. And I completely felt that in here. And I remember thinking, like, man, I feel this. I feel this. It says, now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say? Again, I think this is where I felt like, one, you're supposed to be clean. You're supposed to be, pure. And if you can't be that, then you need to be cast away, right? At this point in my life, when I read that, there were so many people, so many young people getting erased for the church for having pregnancies outside of wedlock. And this was only happening to the women. This wasn't happening to the men, right? And I remember at some point, like, oh Lord, I was abused. Like that was like assault, like all the way. Like, oh my gosh, I praise you that I did not end up pregnant out of that nonsense, right? But I was like, how much worse would it have been? And so in my brain, it's like, oh, okay. If anybody else knows, like, I'm gonna be stoned in this sense. It says, they said, testing him that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his fingers as though he did not hear. Yeah, I think this is funny when I say Jesus has jokes, because as he did not hear, I'm like, ooh, Jesus played deaf too? Like, so it's not a bad thing because Jesus played deaf too, right? And I also, this was also the very first time where I find the story of Jesus writing on the, like Jesus writing. We see 3 times where Jesus writes in the Bible, right? He writes the commandments on stone. Now, I know for people, it's like, that's the law, that's the ultimate. But I have learned that relationships have boundaries, and relationships have boundaries out of love that are for safety reasons for me and for everybody who comes around us. And so the commandments to me are no longer just laws and rules. The commandments are boundaries of love. The first 4 are, it's like, I have these boundaries in place to safeguard my relationship with God. The next 6 are to safeguard my relationship with men. So it's not even restrictions, it's healthy boundaries for relationship with God and with fellow men. And when we can reframe our brain to understand that, I get why he wrote that in stone. That's what he wanted me to make sure that I forget that we can always see it, because when it's written in stone, you can't get rid of that. But I praise God that when he writes our sins, they are on the sand that can be easily blown away and erased. And I also understood in this passage, everything that was done to me or that I did in my response to trauma can be easily erased in the sand, so long as I am at his feet, so long as I am submitting. And to me, that was just so profound. And what I love about that is Jesus stooped down to write my sins on the sand. Like, Jesus came down to my level so that I can see that I see him. Like, Jesus, I am standing at this point, I am these men full of sin, right? Because I cause pain too in my pain. And when I think of my sins, I am literally, this is a judgment case. right? This is a courtroom. The judge steps down from behind where he's sitting, comes down, lowers himself lower than me, writes everything horrible I have done. And he says, we can still erase that. Do you know that when you're talking to children, you stoop down to their level because you want them to understand? I need you to see what I see. I see you. I hear you. Jesus knew I already felt on the lowest level. And when he is writing my sins, he's not saying I'm throwing these in your face. He's saying, I need you to understand that although you feel down here, I see you and I am pursuing you. But I also need you to see how those are going to be erased. And it took that moment for the men to step up and see what he was writing, right? And I remember thinking of like, he's just plain dumb. Like, he's just like, I don't even hear y'all accusations. So when they continued asking him, and this is where I say, this is where I'm like these people. Remember, I kept pressing my mom, like, do you believe them? And here's them like, do you hear me? Do you hear what we are telling you? Like, and his only request was like, he who is without sin, let him throw the first stone. Y'all, if Jesus never had comeback words, these are the best comeback words ever, right? I would be the people in the background like, ooh, like instigating kind of thing. Like, I'd be like, ooh, you heard that? Like, So I feel like this is also like, when people are about to fight, everybody gets around and like, instigates it or refutes it. Like, I'd have been the first one to be like, ooh, he told you. Like, like you can't throw nothing. Like, throw that away because did you see your name right there? Like, but man, in the most simplest ways, like there's no way he was as pumped as I would have gotten, right? But it was also his way of telling them, I see you. And I know you see her, but if you don't have, okay, go ahead. I also acknowledge that by the very definition alone, the only one who had the right to throw the stone was Jesus. The only one who had the right to condemn was Jesus, and he didn't. And I understood for the first time that he does not condemn me. That he doesn't, no matter how much I blame myself, no matter how much I thought I did something wrong, I could have, should have, could have, would have kind of thing. It wasn't on me. And this wasn't something I did wrong. I finally understood it here. And then it says, those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went away one by one, beginning with the oldest and even to the least. That is so profound to me because we all know that elders have the highest respect, right? In our culture and in our church, that's just the way it rolls. And it reminds me again that we need to be a church that listens to the little ones. Because if we don't and we don't pay attention, we can also be exposed in our own, wisdom of years, as we call it. It says, and Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? She said, no one, Lord. And Jesus said to her, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have light of life. There are not many times in the Bible that I have heard Jesus say this. And I remember the very first thing that he says to her is woman, right? This woman was a prostitute. And from what we all know of prostitutes, at least from where I work, nobody grows up to say, like, when you're asked at school, like, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? Nobody raises their hand and be like, ooh, I want to be a prostitute. That just doesn't happen. That's not normal, right? Most women in this era, definitely, they were either abused, again, they weren't virgins, couldn't provide for themselves, couldn't be married, or couldn't do any of that. And I remember feeling exactly like that. Like I don't deserve a godly marriage because I wasn't pure. And I remember this is the first time that God says, woman. Can you guys remember when when that word was first used? When was it? In the beginning, right? Adam says, this is woman, flesh of my flesh, bones of my bones. And she will be called woman because she is part of me, right? And Adam was the perfect representation of Jesus, right? In her position, she was called everything but woman. You don't deserve the title woman, right? When we look at prostitution, even in our own kind of modern days, we don't look at them as women. We look at them as how they carry themselves, as someone who sells themselves, someone who does this, who does that, that kind of thing. When Jesus says woman, he is literally reclaiming her. She had no one to claim her and protect her because she had no husband. She had no one to be there for her. But in this moment, Jesus is saying, woman, he is reminding her, you are flesh of my flesh, bones of my bones. I love you because you are a part of me, not because of who you are or what you've done. When I read this way, I was like, I am flesh of your flesh. I am bones of your bones. When he is saying woman, he's talking to me. And he says, where are my accusers? And it was then that I was just like, nowhere, Lord. Like, this is you restoring me like you restored her. I don't have to hold on to what everybody else says because you tell me who I am. I almost forgot when everybody's noise was accusing, right? But you tell me who I am. And he doesn't say, like, he literally says, go and sin no more. Don't do those things, right? And he says, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. And when I tell you, there are different things that I still struggle with, as there are different triggers that I still have, you know, and there are different things that I am working through to restore, but I totally acknowledge that God wants to restore every piece of my life. You know, my cousin who abused me, his real name is not Miko. I don't know about you guys, but we have nicknames in our family kind of thing. And his nickname was actually Miko, right? And so when I came to church, the pastor was like, hey, like my my nieces and nephews were in high school. And because I do what I do for a living and work in abuse, I don't trust nobody, right? I don't trust if you from the church. I don't care. We got people in the church abusing others. We ain't even gonna. So if you want my kids there, I'm gonna be there. Like, like my kids are here, I'm gonna be right there, front and centered. What you want me to do? What you need help with? Because I'm not going nowhere if my babies aren't here, right? And so the pastor, he's like, hey, like I have this young lady who really needs some counseling. Like, can you help her out? Like, talk to her and just kind of help her out. Like, she's going through some stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, cool. That's no big deal, right? And I remember I have a young man who I see, like who I love as one of my sons. And at that time, he was dating a young lady, and he came and he introduced her to me. He's like, Monica, like, look, this is my girlfriend, guys. And when I say her name is Miko, I looked at her and I said, Jesus, try me, it's church. Like, negative. I don't even like you. I don't even know you, but I don't even like you. Right? And I was like, no, Jesus, we're not gonna do this today. And I was like, well, good. Hey, how are you doing? Y'all, this is how much I know I need Jesus. When I tell you I initially go into fighting mood, I'm not playing. Like, I am a grown woman, but I found myself threatening a teenager and being like, if you ever hurt my baby, I'm gonna hurt you. And then I realized, like, ooh, I'm in church, rein it back. Like, like catch it back, kind of see what you're doing. And she just kind of smiled, and kind of threw it through. But I had already made it in my mind. I don't want to get to know this little girl. I don't even like you. Don't even like your name. Like you did this. Satan, get thee behind me, right? This is how I say Jesus got jokes. So the pastor's like, hey, let me give you this number. Let me give you this number so that you can call her and kind of. And so I call this young lady, right? And I'm helping and I'm doing this. And she's like, hello. And I was like, hey, Pastor Danny told me to give you a call. Like, this is that we're having this conversation. And she's like, I was like, by the way, give me your name. She's like, oh, this is Miko. And I was like, I'm sorry, who? I'm sorry, what's your name? Y'all, I was so angry at Jesus. I was so angry. It's like, this is not fair. This is not okay. Like, that's not even a name I heard my entire life, right? And there is no reason why I should be triggered by this. But man, when I tell you God is good, she and that young man ended up breaking up. And she was going through some hard things in a relationship. And it was so weird because the things that she was going through were things that I was going through in a current breakup myself. So God turned our pain into like that connection kind of thing. And when I tell you, she is one of the young adults that are still works with me at our UG church. And I can tell you, God is good when He says He wants to heal every part of you, because I can actually say, I love Miko. I love this young lady. I've mentored her. We've had Bible studies together. We've cried together. We've laughed together. And there was no way in my brain I ever thought that was going to happen. Right? Like, nobody's ever going to say, I love Miko. No. I found myself having to pray for him because I also acknowledge that our abuse, my earliest memory at that time was 8 years old, like I told you guys. But going through some pictures, I actually remember it started when I was 4 or 5 years old. And he was only 4 years older than me, meaning he was also a child. So what was happening to him that made him act out on me? Does that make sense? And so knowing what I know now, these were children who were abusing on others because something was happening. Abuse is taught. We're not born knowing about abuse. It's taught, right? So I also had to find grace, and I finally find myself in a position where I pray for him. When my grandmother died about a month ago, I have no more reason to go back to this town, right? And I was like, I'm done. Don't got to go back there. I'm cool. We got to do this. And recently, like, I've had another family member who is ill, and we're having to go back there even more frequently. And I haven't gone back, but these past 2 weeks, God has been like, I know you don't want to go back, but have you asked me if you should go back? And I said, Jesus, don't even go there with me. We're about to fight because this is not something I'm doing. And he said, I know that you would be safe not going, but have you asked me what I need of you? And pray for me, because we will be going back next week by the grace of God. And I think He's got big things planned beyond my imagination, where again, the glory of God is going to be displayed in some way. So I share this with you. I don't know if any of you have experienced it or not. All I can tell you is there is glory. There is glory and healing when God is the writer of your story. He is the writer of my story, right? This is not my love story is the fact that I can love because He loved me. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me.